Sasquatch Land, and welcome to another Tuesday night at Discover Sasquatch. Um, I messed up the intro. It's the one eye again. Sorry about that. And just want to let everybody know tonight that I have a sick grandson at home, so the studio's in the basement, so you might hear some plumbing going on, but they're gonna try and hold off till the end of the show. So I'd like to say hello to everybody. Mr. the Godfather himself, Mr. Alfred Santoriga's in the house. Hello, Alfred. Boots on the ground with Barb. How are you doing tonight? Miss Diane Fowler, glad to see you. Blue Eyed or Northern, my friend, glad to see you tonight. Francesca E., glad to see you made it back yourself. Con Swatch, Butch Grimes, Mark the Plowboy Green is in the house. People are starting to pour in. It's great to see everybody here tonight. We have a very great guest for you all tonight, Mr. Tobe Johnson, co-producer of a documentary series, author of a book, and he's got some audio that he's going to share with you all tonight that is pretty amazing. I love when you hear them talk, and he's captured that, and I hope you guys are excited for that because I'm excited for you guys all to hear that. So that's about all I got. We're going to get this show on the road. So without any further ado, bring out Mr. Tobe Johnson. Hello,
hey.
How are you tonight?
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing it with us here at Discover Sasquatch and the people in the chat. They're very appreciative. They're all excited for the show. And before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got involved into this whole scene with the Sasquatch?
The Sasquatch. Okay. Well, my story starts in the little town of Springfield, Oregon. I grew up in the Willamette Valley, Pacific Northwest guy through and through. And it, it was one of those things that had always been around as far as living in the Pacific Northwest. It was just Bigfoot was kind of introduced from the moment I was born as far as the culture here. The Native Americans certainly, brought up Sasquatch through their totems and through their oral traditions. And then, of course, every campfire story that I ever went to had at least one good Bigfoot story. And there were lots of those as well. But, it kind of ended there as far as my experience was concerned from my childhood onwards. And it wasn't till I had my first son, my only son, Jude, and I were on a walk, and we were on a light hike east of Springfield, Oregon, when he was about 3 or 4 years old. And we found just a single 14.5-inch track on a icy February right outside of a neighborhood, actually right outside of my old alma mater, Thurston High School. And, I knew that kids go up to these parts to smoke weed and to skip school. And that was always, something that I knew about the era we were in, is that someone could have easily hoaxed this and just been waiting, or left the scene and just stamped a 14.5-inch track down in the mud and got the heck out of Dodge. And it certainly wasn't a boot print. It was, you could see the toes. They were kind of all collected together. They weren't really spread out. But, because I had my son with me, and I kind of wanted to entertain the possibility that it was something cooler than a hoax, we put a scale object next to it and took a photo. And that's how we came up with a rough estimation of the size of it. Now, it was just a single impression in the icy mud headed towards the blackberry brambles. And so for me, it was just a question of what if. And it just so happened within our community, there was a guy by the name of Ron Olson who back in the 70s filmed a documentary called, actually it was a mockumentary. It was more of a mockumentary than a documentary. It was an actual film loosely based on Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin called Sasquatch, filmed in the Three Sisters Wilderness. And I think you can watch it free on YouTube now. It's kind of a hokey 1960s, 70s grainy film. and cowboys on horseback. I have a Bigfoot experience. Well, that's Ron Olson's baby, and he took the subject matter super seriously, 25 years of his life devoted to looking for this thing. And so I showed it to Ron. I showed him the picture, and I said, hey, my son and I are out the backside of Thurston. This was circa 2007 timeframe. And as soon as he looked at me and he said, oh, it looks legit. I mean, it certainly could be. You never know. I mean, that's awful close to town, but there's a guy that lives out that way that swears they come that close to town, and he's seen them on multiple occasions. And as soon as he set me up with this guy, this river guide, and said, hey, you can sit back and you can talk to this guy and hear his Bigfoot encounters, multiple encounters. That was just such an awesome invitation for a mystery. And so let's just get that out of the way, is that I'm a nut, an adrenaline junkie for an open-ended mystery. And that's exactly what this phenomena has served to be. And, kind of what I was hoping it was initially is that this could not be figured out, because I never thought of Bigfoot as being something merely flesh and blood. It didn't make any sense to me. It was too much of a gray area. It just fit within the realm on the library shelves of the paranormal. It was stacked onto the library shelves between telekinesis, ESP, poltergeist, ectoplasm, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and magic, and everything was right there, making sense to me. Like, oh yeah, Bigfoot belongs in the Dewey Decimal System in the paranormal area. And so that's where my head was at with it, UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot. And so I was like, well, I'm never going to figure this out. This certainly seems legit. And so, I didn't know how right I was, if this was going to be something I was going to figure out within a matter of a couple of years of talking to a guy that had an initial experience, and I could go out and experience this and have a visual, then maybe this is less of a supernatural phenomena if it's that easy. But and I'm skipping ahead here quite a bit, but I sat back and I listened to this river guide story, and basically, in a nutshell, what he told me is that he had had multiple experiences over a period of 15 or 20 years, and that these were close range experiences. And then he proceeded to tell me that they followed him home, and he would have night visitors and day visitors, and this would fall in line with a specific grade of Bigfoot authors, presenters, and experiencers like Tom Powell, Henry Franzoni, Ron Moorhead, and Sally Shepard Walford. These were all the woo mentors that I had in the beginning. And so these guys kind of pulled me aside and said, yeah, this river guide's right. It is much stranger than these other people will tell you, the Meldrums of the world. And so that's where I kind of had to pick and choose how I was going to investigate this. And I started to lean pretty heavily on what these people were telling me. This is much stranger.
Yeah, that most people don't start off like you start off. Most people don't start on the paranormal side. It's usually flesh and blood, and and then they have to have that first experience, to make them think twice about what's going on. And not many start off. So you started right up at the truth. I mean, I agree with you 100% right now, today, that 100% something else to these guys, and you started off right on the right track. And when did you decide to take it to the next level? When did you decide that you wanted to take it to the people by writing a book and co-producing documentaries? When did you decide you wanted to do that?
I was just hungry for it, man. I'm hungry for this mystery, and it's led to other hungers along the way. But, having a sighting of a Sasquatch is secondary to have an experience of the phenomena that happens in Sasquatch country. And so those experiences included the lights. Like, it took me about 4 or 5 years to experience those lights. And, I had now, we're fast forwarding again between 2007 to about 2012 timeframe. And in that spectrum of time, I've put on conferences, I've gotten to know a fair amount of Bigfooters. I'm, out chasing down sightings that are recent to super old, up the McKenzie drainage to the Three Sisters Wilderness to the high Cascades of Oregon and everywhere in between. Not really the Coast Range, but mostly the upper elevations of the Cascades.
So you were bit by the bug. You had the bug bad.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it really came down to the fact that I love the outdoors, and I didn't care if I had a sighting. And I just felt called to the woods, even without this mystery. On top of it, I just loved hiking. But then, seeing these lights really changed everything, because it's such a compelling thing to witness first off, especially when people said, in proximity to Bigfoot countries are these organic balls of light that, change and shift and contrast in size and color, and they can basically pop open like a camera flash from low level to high level, or they can move about from tree to tree, and they come in different varieties of colors. And then you can have a Bigfoot encounter in that proximity. That didn't really matter to me as much as just seeing the fact that these lights could not be explained, and the organic nature, the living quality nature of whatever these lights are, is beyond just a bioluminescent glow. There's intelligence to these things here. And that's just something that you not only feel, but, they follow people. They seem to answer to questions periodically. They can, maybe we can talk about this later, but I think they can be measured through static charges or EMF charges and things like that. So there is something else going on with these lights. It's certainly not ball lightning or swamp gas that I've seen. So that really was an interest to me as far as what these lights are and how, and if it's connected to the Bigfoot phenomena. So that was really that's what kind of pushed me over the edge to all these other phenomena that we'll talk about later.
So did that bring you to the Owl Moon Lab? Is that where this all came about? How did you meet the landowners?
Yeah.
Why don't we do this first? Why don't you tell everybody about the Owl Moon Lab?
Okay.
What that was all about and how it came about.
Sure. So between 2008 till around 2017, I pretty much just chased after the phenomena of footprints and seeing lights, and doing live podcast at bars once a month, where I would do town hall meetings, and we would, wax poetic over a couple IPAs and have some nice bar food and tell Bigfoot stories once a month. And that got me to meet a whole host of what I call Sasquatch contactees, or extended experiencers, people that claim to have Bigfoot in their own backyard, and they have, ongoing activity. Between that was the London tracks. 2012, there was over 120 footprints cast by 15 researchers. My son and I helped find this trackway in the little town of Cottage Grove, Oregon. And, it was an impressive trackway that spread out over 100 yards on an empty lake bed on another cold February. Now, the reason I mention that is because it's in Cottage Grove. It's in the Cottage Grove lake bed. And without that track find, I don't know if there'd be any Owl Moon Lab. The property owner had heard about this track find around 2018. His name's Daryl Adams, and he was a recent retiree from the little town of Redding, California, and then moved up here towards Cottage Grove, Oregon. And his wife was still working. He was retired. They bought a farmhouse not too far from where these tracks were found some years previous to that. And he sent me an email. He had a small conversation with Ron Moorhead about trying to hook up with some other Bigfooters in and around Cottage Grove. Ron and I were friends, and Ron said, hey, Tobe Johnson lives out that way. Just look him up on social media. And so, between all those things happening in the little town of Cottage Grove in 2012 and Daryl moving there, it just kind of set the pace for basically a new pastime for this guy after, he's recently retired, to sit back and hang out with me and talk Bigfoot. And I said, well, you moved to an excellent area. And I know there's Class A sightings right above your house. And this is one heck of a hobby to get into. And, I work full time. At that time, I was a truck driver. But I said, on my off time, I'll definitely come down to your house and we can head up to the hills. And he said, awesome. So he got all the Bigfoot toys that a guy could get. He got a FLIR camera and got a used pickup truck, and was kind of remodding his house a little bit and putting up this 2-story shop that was between the main house and the drive port. And so I came out and checked out his house, and he said, well, let's go deer hunting. I drew this tag. Maybe we can go Bigfooting too, and we'll just head up in the hills and we'll take off next week. It's supposed to be nice. I think it was Good Friday of 2018. I believe it was, I think it's the 30th of March or something like that. And so that was a full moon. It was also called the owl moon. And so underneath this full moon, the owl moon on Good Friday, Daryl and I are out deer hunting and looking for stick sign and going to areas where I'd known there'd been Sasquatch reports. And off the side of the road, at the end of the day, near this area Daryl wanted to take me to, where he thought he'd seen a stick structure, I told him, I said, stop the truck. And we backed up the truck and off the side of the road. It was a beautiful day. It was getting, towards, 5 o'clock in the evening. So it was still light out. And so I get my camera out because I see something really interesting off the side of the road. And it looks like somebody dribbled a basketball. That's what it looked like. It looked like somebody dribbled a basketball twice in the mud. And so we get out and we start looking at these dents in the red clay. And in the clay, you can see striations. You can see hair flow. You can see it looks like the patella of a knee bending down, especially on the left side. And as I zoom in with my, iPhone, whatever, I can see black hair flow combing down into this perfect red clay. And then black hair is poking vertically up out of the patella area. And it's fairly large, So we ran through the list of things we could think it was. It certainly, it couldn't have been a human. It was just so hairy and big and deep. And so I was like, Daryl, I don't know what we have here, but I'm doing these live events down the road at this bar. This would be awesome material to put on the big screen, no matter what it is. We haven't cast a track yet for the show. So let's take these hairs out. Let's do everything forensic, come back, collect ourselves. And so 11 o'clock at night, we come back with Daryl and his wife and methodically extract these hairs and end up casting, this single unit of what we believe are knee impressions, and then sending the hair up to a gal named Cindy Dosen in Canada, who runs the Hominid Enigma project for the Olympic project out here in Washington. And so Cindy agreed to come on live at the live podcast I was doing at the bar via Zoom. And I said, don't tell me what the hair analysis shows, microscopically, if it's a deer, if it's a bear, whatever. I want to be surprised with the audience. and so she came on live and said that the hairs were an anomaly, that there's nothing in the data bank that matches them. And she went through the list of reasons and said, this is like hair number 6 out of over 200 and some hairs that I've looked at that is anomalous. It does not match anything. It's human-like, but because of the core shaft medulla area and the way that it shatters, it almost stair steps. It's not like there's a total lack of medulla, but there's it's just brittle looking inside the shaft of it. And it has an Irish setter red color to it, pigment wise, when you look at it microscopically, but when you're looking at it with a naked eye, it looks black. And it kind of looks like a human beard hair or something. And so, here we are looking at these knee impressions, like, what if these are Bigfoot tracks? So, our Bigfoot knee impressions. So we have all this hair, and, everyone at the bar is like, hooray, you got some crazy knee impressions. And so it was it was a real anomaly as far as Cindy Dosum was concerned, and as far as an orthopedic surgeon was concerned that we showed it to. It was just like, these knees are too big. They're outside of the human realm, but they have human-like hair. So as soon as we brought these impressions back, that's when things went crazy at Daryl's place, because they had to be dried, over a period of like 3 weeks before we started to extract the clay off the mold, right? And or the clay or the plaster positive. And it was during that time that these knees were sitting in the garage that things went bonkers. And I had already heard that people that have the phenomena happening at their house, or they know where these hot spots are privy to more supernatural, paranormal, unexplainable things occurring that aren't just Bigfoot related. Everything in between. The kitchen sink seems to get thrown at him. And this is what Tom Powell was telling me, in the books like The Locals, or Ron Moorhead was telling me, and things that happened to him up in the Sierra camp. And certainly Henry Franzoni was telling me that, this phenomena gets really strange when it comes home with you. The hitchhiker effect, like they talk about at Skinwalker Ranch. And so that's when things started to go kind of crazy. And so I moved in as soon as these strange sounds started to happen at the house, which were kind of, insignificant to most people. These tapping sounds or popping or hitting sounds, which could have been played off as, let's just say that it's a great ape. Then it was throwing rocks at the house, but the rocks weren't landing. There was no secondary sound of a rock hitting the side of the house or the barn or whatever, the window, and then a rock landing and rolling on the sidewalk. And there should be, a secondary sound. So what is this sound? And that's when I moved in. As soon as these sounds started, I was invited to move in and research.
Well, how can you beat that? Friends getting abnormal hairs, and now you're living there. I mean, it's like a Bigfooter's dream. Everything that's happening right now. Did you guys actually, the Owl Moon Lab, is that like its own entity? Is that out in the forest? Did you build something out there, or is that just a name that you guys came up with?
Yeah, so the Owl Moon was, when we cast these prints underneath this moon, that's where we called these the Owl Moon knee impressions, because they were found, underneath this magnificent full moon. And so that's where the name came from. The lab part of it came from the fact that I was actually building a Sasquatch replica for Ron Moorhead. We were going to recreate the Sierras sounds up in the Cottage Grove wilderness for him for, we're just going to invite some friends up in the woods. So I was building a life-size Sasquatch. And so Daryl had come into the shop. And he had invited me to move in, and not only move in, but build this giant Bigfoot in his garage. And I say that like your audience knows this, but so here I am building my second or third Bigfoot statue. And Daryl walked in and said, "Oh my gosh, it's like Frankenstein's laboratory in my house now." And I said, "I know, man. It's getting kind of crazy around here." But and that's how crazy the story is that here I am 100% a Bigfooter building a Bigfoot for, for Ron, naming it Biggie, which is what Ron called, the Sasquatch in the Sierra Sounds is Biggie. And here we're having all this Bigfoot stuff. And so it just sounds, completely ridiculous, but it's too crazy to be a lie. And we just had so many things happen, and luckily so many people involved with the chain of custody of these things that happen. Because if it was just Daryl and I saying, "Oh yeah, we're having all this Bigfoot luck and finding all this stuff, and no, you can't look at it and it's ours," and it was never like that. We were just inviting anyone that would come out there and everyone to experience this, because it would repeat itself. It was repeatable. So for that part, it was kind of like, there was a little bit of the scientific method and a laboratory setting involved, because it was a lockdown area. In particular, this metal shop that I talked about in the beginning, this 2-door garage shop that you could pull 2 small RVs in, was kind of my little lab area. I had my trailer parked outside on the gravel driveway, and the shop, which I had access to all the time. And that's where I would go in and do all my audio downloads. And but there was something that they liked about that shop, because as we talked about earlier, one of the first clues that we had that someone was getting in the shop was this little blue dinosaur, which was set right on the shelf above the knees, which were drying on the cement floor. Now, this means something to you, Chris. You get toys as well, right?
Right. Well, we were talking about this last night. I was telling how when I was trading with my clan here that they love the dinosaur toys. They love taking them and coming back with them and putting them in certain spots. Then all of a sudden, Toby lifts up this
Yeah.
plastic dinosaur, and I'm like, how can that be? From thousands of miles apart, they're interested in the same things, the same plastic dinosaurs. I find that very intriguing. I just it's not coincidence that this stuff happens by any chance. I believe.
No, and maybe we should pay attention to the kind of things that they're leaving. I mean, a small dinosaur from a bygone era maybe is more significant of a toy than a Tonka truck, although we would have things like that as well. Like we were talking about Snow White Bigfoot and how she has bags full of these gifts. I have bags full of the same things in Ziploc bags, and they range from everything in between little toys to pieces of balsa wood that look like they've been lit on fire at the tip, to bullet casings, to chewed on dog toys, to large rocks that aren't really anything other than like large gravel rocks, to sticks. And it's not, like I just found these out in the driveway and missed them and then said, "Oh, this must be a Bigfoot gift." No, these things would be like balancing on my rear view mirror. These things would be 7 feet up on the awning of my trailer, hanging off the edge. And not only that, these were gifts, and I write about this in my book. And you can see all this in the book too, because it has QR codes embedded in them. And so, sometimes these gifts were related to things that we had spoken about. For example, I would have some phone trouble, and I'd mentioned that I was having some iPhone trouble and I needed to go get an upgrade. And I was actually in my semi truck headed down from Seattle to Oregon, having a conversation with Daryl on the phone about this. And, the next day I go out to my 14-foot aluminum boat, which was parked there as well. And underneath the oar of my boat was a muddy cell phone, like an old Sidekick phone from like the late 90s with the alphanumeric keypad on it, and it was just stored underneath the oar of my boat. It had, a muddy patina on it. Now I missed some stories between 2007 and where we are at 2018 here, where I'd seen things like this happen before, where people had talked about something, and then this object suddenly shows up at a campsite. Tennis shoes, a necklace, a thermos. And these were all within reason of things that people had just spoken about or had a need for. And these objects just appear overnight or suddenly put in the middle of a trail, or behind a truck or behind a log it's just like too many synchronistic moments. And they have these patinas on them, like these muddy, grassy, moldy, musty patinas to them, like they'd just been found, in the, I don't know, at an old abandoned parks or an old abandoned campsite or something. So that's the unique part about these gifts, is that, not only was it the cell phone, but there's several moments that I talk about in the book where we just had talked about something and something would show up.
Do you think they hoarded it away? They had little storage spots where they would find stuff and then they would just hide it away until they needed it. Maybe one day, something like that. Maybe they were doing that. I never thought of that till now. But
I don't know. Yeah, we called it like Bigfoot Goodwill. Like they had a cave, somewhere,
right.
and they just had an inventory, a fairly accurate inventory of needs, because whatever was happening, excuse me, let's say it was a hoax. Someone was listening and paying attention 24/7, and we weren't able to catch them on camera. Now there was a strange kind of guy that we write about in the book, that lived above us, but this is on 5 or 10 acres or so, and everyone had a plot of land in the Umpqua forest there, and this was just an interesting dude. But he said that he had Bigfoot encounters at his place as well. And we kind of wondered whether or not it was him playing a joke on us at first. So maybe he was listening through a bionic ear, or maybe he was sneaking around when we weren't privy to, him listening and leaving these weird objects. But then, that Daryl ended up seeing a Bigfoot. And that was no small affair. And that was very close to the property. It wasn't at all what he was expecting as far as height and size. I ended up seeing something around 4 a.m, and then comes the handprints. The greasy, what Doug Hychek is calling, Monster Quest is calling albavernix, which is this waxy sebum that is left behind of supposed Sasquatch DNA after they touch a pickup truck or grab your hammock or something like that. There will be this dusty white, what people or Bigfooters have largely passed off as being dust or mud, but it's not. It's something way more interesting than that. It adheres to whatever it touches to a degree where you can't easily get it off. In some cases, you can't get it off because it's degraded what it's touched and mutated it, especially polymer plastics and fabric. I still have a friend of mine that has a hammock with a Sasquatch handprint in it, and it will never come out. But the point is that in proximity to these gifts, we would find these handprints. And so we, we dusted these handprints, and we, put package tape on top of them and transferred them over and kept them for scale and whatnot. And then along came the audio. And so, this is where it gets into the world of the power spot. And it's you can't not mention Skinwalker Ranch, which is probably the most popular 21st century power spot we have in the USA, is that this had a lot of the same phenomena as Skinwalker Ranch did. And these places exist all over the world. In fact, they had a lot of Bigfoot stuff happen at Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of people leave that out of the phenomena, but there were a fair amount of strange lights over this house. There was a fair amount of EVPs that we captured on audio. There were very strange handprints found in the house that did not seem Bigfoot related at all. And those we preserved, and that's mentioned in the book as well. And you can see the videos of all the stuff that I discovered in the book. So as you read along, you can go to the QR code in that chapter where we started to film, and it'll take you immediately, hopefully seamlessly, into the actual Al Moon Lab, where you can experience the audio, experience the video of that chapter. So there's a lot of strangeness.
That's pretty wild. I never even heard of a book like that. That's pretty wild. Tell everybody where to get that, just right off before we
Yeah,
go.
so the Al Moon Lab you can find anywhere. If you go to SasquatchTheLegend.com, you can order it directly from the store down the street from me, and or you can go to Amazon or Hanger One Publishing. But anyway, so that's why I had to write the book, because I knew that this place was the phenomena probably just would end suddenly, and then the whole thing would be over. There's the Bigfoot curse, where evidence suddenly disappears and witnesses suddenly won't talk. And it's been 15 years of me researching, and I was like, well, this is probably going to happen here, or I'm going to be escorted off the property here because I'm too much of a kook here looking into Bigfoot. So I was ready for anything and everything to happen. So I was just like, well, let's get as much of this written down and documented as possible. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to reach back to the people, these Sasquatch contactees, and say, hey, thank you, first of all, for not wasting my time. And, here's my little tip of the hat to you. And, the books that I've read, I hope measure up to the books that I admire, like The Locals and Valley of the Skookum and all these other books.
Did things just always progress every year? Did it just get more and more intense, or did it ever mellow out? Or
Yeah, it did. It got more intense until the property owners moved. And once they moved, things seemed to mellow out in and around that property. The new landowners reported a lot less activity. They did report their hummingbird feeder. In fact, I was there and interviewed them and talked to the new property owners about their hummingbird feeders getting moved around, which was the only thing I think that they had noticed, although I had noticed that there was things that they were missing because they had no idea what to look for. We didn't really clue them in. First of all, the glyph stuff is totally legit, like the stick formations, ignore the doubters. Whatever's going on right now likes to communicate in these druidic glyph forms, and they use little tiny sticks to do it. And those were some of the things that the new property owners didn't really know to look for. And but you had mentioned the hummingbird feeder, and I'm saving that for here to say, yeah, there's something to maybe it's just the fact that it's sugar water. I don't know, but that was one of the things.
yeah, that's again, another coincidence or whatever you want to call it. That just happened here a couple weeks ago, and then we had a black chopper over our house one night, 100-foot hovering, and then they took off, and then no more activity at the bird feeder after that. So
yeah,
chase them away. Whatever goes on, I don't know, but I agree. It's 100%. All this stuff is real. Why did the homeowners move? Was that it for them? Did they have enough, or did they just outgrew
It
the
was,
property.
yeah, no, it was literally just logistics. They just wanted to make a buck off of selling their house and get closer to work. And I tried to get somebody to look at it with the same eye I did to buy this place. I just didn't have the connections that I kind of do now. And who knows? Maybe, I mean, the place, it still could be researched. It doesn't have to be that house, I don't think, just by the mere amount of people that I'd spoken to around that area. The area is rich with stuff. Maybe there is something unique about that specific plot of land. Maybe it was the landowner. I tend to think that certain people are haunted and have that, they just have a target on their back. And you can have a fair amount of success with one person in the woods and go out in the woods in the exact same spot with another person and it's nothing. But you bring old Bubba back and you get those two together, and maybe it's just a sense of humor, maybe it's a lightheartedness, but that tuning frequency, it's like it's the perfect frequency for the phenomena to come in. And Daryl just has that phenomena.
100%. I do not doubt that at all. I do
Yeah.
not. I've been to 7 different states and have had experiences, interactions in 7 different states.
Yeah.
You're marked. I think they mark you. I think they're interested, so they mark you in some way that wherever you are, and if they're around, others are around, or they all know. Who knows? They're going to react. They're going to interact. They're going to
Yeah.
you out.
A
And I'm
big
not crazy. I mean, the whole thing is just wild.
yeah. So we're bouncing a little bit all over the place as far as the actual Almoon lab is concerned. But the important part to mention is the fact that we got to know and confirm through several people that had come to the property and had similar things happen while they were there without us. It's not like we had to even be present. We didn't. And stuff still happens around that property to people that go there, especially above it in the woods. And I still make it down there periodically to check on it. The habitat above it is still, there's a lot of land up there. It's all open and unlogged still. So, but whatever's happening right now, these window areas, Luis Elizondo, the former head of ATIP, who's come forward with the UAP UFO phenomena that used to work for the Pentagon, it coined the perfect term, which is, the spaces in between is kind of how he's leading the public into understanding what's going on with UFOs and where they come from. They don't come from outer space, inner space, but they're pointing to the spaces in between, which is these window areas, these portal areas. And so these places are everywhere around the globe. You just have to find them. And maybe they're seasonal. Maybe they open up like a flower, and then they bloom at a certain time. And maybe that takes a person to kind of nurture the flower and water it. I think you kind of have to be that way to have the supernatural and the paranormal happen. You have to entertain it. You have to feed it. And you can't be scared of it, because there's evil out there, and whatever's happening goes through the same window area. But there's a lot of this gray phenomena. And maybe I mean that in the quite literal sense. There might actually be grays in this phenomenon, although we didn't experience the grays. There certainly was a lot of UFO stuff that happens and continues to happen over that area. In fact, Daryl has an amazing video I put in this book of the Tic Tac, and it just looks like a propane tank gliding over on a summer day over his patio towards the Drina or Cottage Grove Lake area. So there's a lot of overlap here with other phenomena, and I don't know if you want to play some audio and I can explain that now, and then we can get into that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I said, when did you guys decide that audio was a good step forward? When did you guys knew that that was a good thing to use and give up on the cameras? I guess most people.
Well, so I had a camera with me all the time, and I always looked at it as like keeping a family journal of a family I'm never going to meet. It's just like me kind of growing up with these baby steps of meeting these weird family members or these locals, these strange neighbors next door. And although we did use it for documentation quite a bit, but we had FLIRs out, we had game cameras, and mainly those were, in my opinion, put out to see if we were being effed with, if there was somebody that was trying to hoax us. Even if Daryl was trying to mess with me, I didn't really know Daryl that well, and he didn't know me that well. So we were kind of trying to catch one another periodically, and I would hide my FLIR and stick it in my trailer like a periscope coming out, and try to catch something happening other than Bigfoot. And we never caught anything substantial. There were some strange images captured, but we never caught a person. And so like there's been a lot of time that had lapsed between now and the Al Moon Lab, and that cameras are always, we just don't seem to have permission to use them. And so rather than kind of push that narrative that I'm going to be the one to make Bigfoot or this phenomena love cameras, it seemed as though they were interacting with audio equipment all throughout my research from the moment I met Ron. And they would get in close to Ron's recording equipment, and I just thought, gosh, let's leave out the parabolic, and let's leave out a little Tascam recorder on the front yard and the parabolic in the back, and we hit it up that way as much as we can and see if we can bring them in with trust doing that. So that's where all this came from, was just like, how close can we bring them in just by utilizing as much audio as possible?
Nope, I agree with you. Everybody I talk to it's all about audio. We're actually constructing a website right now for all interactions, and it's mainly focused around audio.
Right.
People are going to be able to come to the website if they've seen a Sasquatch on a unicorn playing a ukulele running down Main Street, and they're going to be able to put that report into the data bank and be logged.
Right.
We want a lot of people to come and share their audio, and you shared some great audio with me. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, so we'll go ahead and just go through these clips here. Now, like I said, initially, these started off with just little simple sounds like tapping hits, popping sounds that sound like mouth popping. Another big one was sounds that almost sounded like something coming up to the recorder and flicking its nail bed right up against the mic head. I get that one a lot, and a lot of people do in research areas. And you can put the recorder in a house, you can put it in a shoebox, you can put it in a gun safe, and you still get this strange sound, which sounds like something flicking the mic head. But I'll go ahead and play clip 1 so people can get a sense of just how small and weird these sounds are.
I'll play this one a couple times. Turn it up a little.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the sounds that the property owner would hear, and then we set out our recorders and we would get those recorded. Now there was no secondary sound of a rock being thrown. That's what really got me thinking, like, okay, you know, I have dents on the back of my trailer here as though something has thrown a rock and hit it, but yet I don't have the sound of a rock hitting the side of the trailer and then falling in the gravel. The property owner's not reporting that. So what is this sound? For me, if it's something slapping it, then you have to have an approach of something coming up the gravel driveway and making its approach. You're not going to get, I mean, even the smallest of sound on some of these recorders, especially, our recorders, would pick the sound of a slight approach on gravel, even on grass. And we just weren't getting that with these hit sounds. We did get the approach of stuff coming up to the house on a couple occasions, but those were followed up by, huge Sasquatch moments, which, I'll just leave for people to read inside the book and listen to themselves. But with these hit sounds, it just came up as something else and very fishy sounding. So why don't you play number 2? Because a lot of people talk about wood popping sounds, wood knocking sounds, and we did get those as well. So play clip 2. Yeah. I mean, you hear the sound of what sounds like a Louisville Slugger swinging and hitting a home run. We heard those as well. Now, these are compilation sounds spread out over a period of days, weeks, and months. Some of these sounds sounded as though they were coming out of the shop, which was curious to us. What was it about this metal shop next to my trailer between the house that was eliciting the sound of 2x4s slamming together? We couldn't put it together. We knew that there was, some birds that would periodically roost and come in the eaves, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense for the sounds that you guys just heard, especially the wood knocking sounds. So some were coming from the woods, some were much closer. So we started leaving the recorders in the shop, and that was really the target zone for a lot of these sounds that you're going to hear, is either leaving the recorder outside of this metal shop or inside this shop. We would get strange sounds. So it's hard not to call this property haunted, especially after the next sounds you're about to hear, because there was a lot of unexplained electronic voices caught on our recorders. And if they weren't caught on our actual recorder, they were caught on our cell phones, and they were delivered as video messages with no timestamp and no date stamp. So whatever was being delivered to us was coming as a black screen on Daryl's phone mainly, with a synthetic quality of a male or a female. Sometimes it was English. Sometimes it was a language I've never heard of before. And it has this very strange synthesized quality. Like if you were to load a Casio keyboard and play a voice on it, and it would have that synthesized kind of disco dance quality to it, whatever, techno sound. That's the way it sounded. So this is a compilation of some of these strange voices that we caught over a period of time from the Al Moon Lab. Clip number 3.
Before we go any further, we have just noticed that, like I told you about that thing down in the Florida swamp with my phone. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
this you didn't mention this last night because I didn't want to hear about it. But every time we were down there, they were trying to break into Chris's phone,
Mm-hmm.
scanning, like it was going through his phone trying to get in, and it couldn't get in because he's got all his stuff is blocked.
Oh,
And it was
okay.
scanning his phone, and then I got the message on my phone that we got sent out. But when we were up here 2 weeks later,
Yeah.
guy that came from Massachusetts, we were on the way up to the top of the mountain to where it all went down. His phone started jumping all over the place too,
Yeah.
and then started playing a YouTube video just out of the blue. It was in his pocket, and it does it to Chris all the time. I mean, what's that? What's going on with the phones? I mean,
watch the Skinwalker Ranch show, on Discovery Channel. You see that happen quite a bit, where their phones are literally hijacked, as they're filming the show, and they're trying to turn their phone off or get a hang of it, and it's just rifling through the circuitry and through the photo album, and just and it's pinpointed on that show to two people, basically, that they're after, their phones are after. And the same was with Daryl. Like, it was Daryl's phone. He got like 2 or 3 phones while he was there. I think 2 phones, and they were hijacked. Just let me tell the story real quick. One of the craziest things that ever happened, I don't even think I put in the book, because it's hard to explain this stuff to people, but we put on a virtual COVID conference, a Bigfoot conference during COVID. And Daryl was busy. I think he was in transition of another move, and he had been babysitting. So I was like, well, he can't do this Bigfoot conference with us. And when you do a Zoom meeting, you have to have a member code in order to get in and type it in. And then you're escorted in as a speaker, and you can come on screen with the other speakers. Well, that's what we did for the other speakers. I didn't even really talk to Daryl about this conference. And as we're putting on this conference, all the speakers are lined up, and I'm telling a story about Daryl and how his phone gets hijacked. Daryl pops on the screen with the other speakers. His phone is hijacked in Cottage Grove, Oregon. I'm looking at him as he's holding a baby and the phone's sitting on his kitchen counter, and he's just sitting there kind of frozen in time. Now, he didn't have access to this meeting. My point is that something heard this conversation and turned his phone on. And even weirder yet is, as we're, I'm typing to the other speakers there, like, oh my gosh, Daryl is in this meeting with us here. This is impossible. And as I'm writing that out, his picture glistens down like a glitter pixie dust off the edge of the screen, which is not even something you can do on Zoom. It just pixelates down in the corner. And I'll never forget one of the speakers watching this with me. And just incredible anecdotal evidence, I guess. I mean, we did record it, and Daryl had no idea his phone was even on. So it's those kind of things. It's just like, it's so much bigger than Bigfoot, because I don't think this is all just Bigfoot by any means. This is, Bigfoot is the base layer for the paranormal, and all this other stuff comes along with it. You can choose to ignore it if you want, but it's not going to ignore you.
I can tell you that. My wife can tell you that too.
Mm-hmm. So let's play clip 3. These are some compilations of EVPs. You're not going to understand a good majority of what they're being said, but these are long morphine streams, is what they're called. They're cognitive speech, and there are sets of them. So go ahead and play them.
Play it one more time. That one voice that sounds to me, it's like, "You home?"
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I hear. It sounds like an old man, opening up the garage door saying, "Are you home?"
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Now, there's a couple in there too where I can't quite figure out. It sounds like two different voices back to back saying the same thing, which is "help me get back," which is a pretty disturbing or sad kind of thing to hear. Maybe it's saying "Toby, get back." I don't know. One of those voices I actually heard real time. See, what I would do is I would lay out like a psychopath in a zero gravity chair outside of this haunted house in this haunted shop at odd hours when I'd get home truck driving and wait for the phenomena to happen, because I wasn't getting hurt. I wasn't getting scratched. I wasn't getting marked, nothing like that. Um, I just, I I just wanted to see something so bad, something physical, instead of, so much of this phenomena is the after effect. And so, that whispery voice that you just heard that says, "Help me get back," or "Toby, get back." I remember hearing that as I was laying out with a speaker in my head, line fed into the garage, which is one of the things that we would do, was to try to filter out where the phenomena would meet us. So if you have a recording, you have a layer, you have a digital layer happening of audio. But if you have a camera pointed at the recorder, now you have a digital and you have a video element and you have an audio element. So you have 3 layers there. And between those layers there, somewhere you're going to find one of these voices, or the phenomena is going to present itself. And that takes a lot of work to do. You got to go back and listen to it if it's not something that you hear initially. But we just went for it. And so that's how we got those EVPs. Now, the voice clip number 5 here, I think, is an example of what I would call a morphine stream. It certainly sounds like typical Sierra chatter, Sasquatch chatter. If I had to guess what it is, we had a family group in and around the forest through the house, and that the juveniles, the teenagers, more or less, I guess, would come down to the house. And when they're in pairs, I think that they speak. I think they use their language. When they come down as a solo unit, there's really no need for it. But I think this is at least 2, an older one and a younger one, communicating from the back apple orchard.
I've heard that. Angie has a recording. She calls it the war cry, and it's the same exact thing. That
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the same recording. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and so that, maybe there's 2 other sounds that are kind of in that category, but out of all the sounds we caught, a lot of it was just, a lot less compelling, I guess, as far as Bigfoot language goes. There was a lot of EVPs, a lot of ghost stuff that happened. And, as this stuff is happening, property damage is happening at the house. We can't really leave that out. The fences are getting pulled down. The T-posts are getting bent down at an angle. The gutters are being squeezed 9 feet up by giant greasy handprints. My trailer is being aspirated with blackberry juice from something that has sneezed and then, left like an 8-inch or 10-inch swath of blackberry spit. I've got dents on the back of my trailer. There's giant urine streaks between my trailer and the garage. There's footprints being left in the gravel, which is, come on. It's very difficult to even try to explain how difficult that would be to leave a 5-toed 14-inch track in the gravel, smooth down into the hard pan. So there's some bonkers stuff happening, and there's animal kills. We haven't even got into that. But maybe chief among the weirdness is author, scientist Henry Franzoni, author of The Spirit of Sasquatch, comes down to the property and hangs out, grabs some pizza, sits around the fire with us, hears all our crazy stories. And we start asking Henry about his theory about how drumming, a certain specific drum beat, elicits the paranormal or the supernatural, like the Haitian voodoo doctors might have done. They're certainly, to contact the spirit realm in Africa, they would break out the drums and build a big fire and contact the other side. Well, Henry was into, theorizing why that may be and what's happening. And so we're talking about this, and Henry's one of those guys that has an extended experiencer, like this river guide. Had some very interesting things happen to him, very fringe theories about how Bigfoot does what it does. And then friend Henry left. He packed his stuff up around 2 a.m. and headed back up to Vancouver, Washington area. And about 3 days later, in and around this hot spot where the shop was, I had put my little Tascam DR05 in this little compartment against the metal wall. And outside of this metal wall, in the gravel yard, was an empty 50-gallon drum. It was just sitting there. We didn't really use it for anything. It was just part of what the property was before Daryl bought it. And that's when we caught the sound. Now, you tell me what you hear, but I hear something, that sounds like something drumming and then percussively vocalizing something. So I'll go ahead and play that. Okay. We got to play that time. That is absolutely. So, when I caught that, I think it was about 3 days later. So I immediately called up Henry and I was just like, hey, man, you have to hear this. I think that they were jazzed on your drumming theory, man. I think that was a total tip of the hat. Like, we'd never got drumming before. And that was absolutely something hitting that 50-gallon drum. And I sent all this audio was going off to David Ellis at the Olympic Project, who's kind of their sound guy. And he nearly, I mean, he'd heard all these EVPs coming up, and he's not really a ghost hunter guy, but when you look on spectrogram, that percussive quality and the complication of what you're hearing, and some of that was cleaned up, but the original audio, he has all that stuff too. And it's just so wild. It's nothing in nature. I mean, I mean, if maybe that's a giant wild pig, I don't, but we didn't have wild pigs, running around out there. So
To me, it sounded like a group of them chanting. It was like, oh, okay, like you were saying, like when they in Africa or wherever they did rituals with. I could see a whole group of around a fire, and all of them chanting that "Who I ye oh." Really,
yeah, because there is a timpan. I mean, there's a rhythmic beat, bum, 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 in the beginning. I mean, there's an appreciation for rhythm, in my opinion. That's what I hear in the beginning, and then the vocals afterwards is just very crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like chanting to me, and I want to just say thank you for sharing that with me and the tribe that we have over here. That was just phenomenal. I never even knew that you had this stuff. I got interested in Toby seeing his building of the big Sasquatch, just big Sasquatch heads and all that.
Right.
I didn't know about all this other stuff until last night, and I knew he wrote a book and was co-producer of this documentary series. But I
Yeah.
didn't know all this other stuff. I didn't know about the landowners. I didn't know you were living there. I didn't know all this, and I just blown away. I'm just blown away. I've never heard of anything like this ever in the 8 years I've been doing it. None of this stuff. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate being on here, man.
Really, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
For everybody who doesn't know, Toby's going to come back on the radio station next Thursday and talk about he co-produced. It's called "The Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed." It's a great documentary. I think it's one of the best I've ever seen, really. And he's going to be on the radio station next week with his buddy, the co-producer, and so he's going to be back. And I'd love to have him back on this show. That's for sure. I told him I'd like to open up the questions for like 10 minutes. So if you guys got any questions for Toby, I know we kind of went through this and I didn't know there was this much stuff. So I apologize. That's my fault. I'd love to have him back on this show again too, so we can talk more about about the Moon Lab, because I definitely want to hear more, and I'm sure you guys.
Yeah. Well, this Flash of Beauty is available now. You can stream it free on Tubi. You have to go through the commercials, but it's free. You can watch it anywhere. There's a streaming platform. There's Blu-ray DVDs out now. Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, Part 1. Part 2 comes out Memorial Day weekend 2023, and it premieres at our second annual Bigfoot Days in Forks, Washington, home of vampires and werewolves. So if you don't have anything going on, you can go on SasquatchTheLegend.com and buy tickets. We're going to have the premiere there on Friday night of Memorial Day weekend. We'll also have Doug Hychek of Monster Quest coming into town. Tom Powell will be speaking. Cliff Barrickman will be speaking. Thomas Seawood will be there. Mel Scahan, who's a Yakima Native American. We're going to have a lot of fun for 2.5 days in Forks, Washington, including the second part of Flash of Beauty, which is on the paranormal and the paranormal only. It's called Paranormal Bigfoot Flash of Beauty. And you think the Al Moon is strange? Wait till you see who we've interviewed. You've never even heard of these Bigfooters. I've never heard of these guys. I've been in this, since 2008. And these are the craziest, most compelling Bigfoot stories that have ever been caught on video. And they're way crazier than anything that had happened to us, as far as I've been able to tell. And including in that is author Simeon Hine, who is the author of the book Dark Matter Monsters, which just came out, which, you know, may be able to explain what's happening here as far as how Bigfoot is able to do what it's able to do scientifically. And I think he's going to be one of those voices that we're going to be leaning in on, and people like him to help us bring in the proper language to escort these flesh and blood folks into this weirder conversation. Because if Bigfoot can cloak, maybe, it's more like a chameleon cloaking. Maybe it's more like a cuttlefish or a jellyfish or an octopus cloaking. Maybe things are just happening around it, genetic wise to camouflage itself. I don't think it's that simple. I think something way more interesting and cooler is happening in the Bigfoot world than just explaining it through the natural sciences. There's something highly unnatural and out of this world that is happening, and maybe they're from out of this world or the places in between.
I think Mr. Moorhead in his book says it well. The quantum Bigfoot, quantum entanglement. That's what it sounded like to me. That what was going on at that property. You got to think, and then it would happen. I mean, that's quantum entanglement. That's you're thinking it's going down.
And now it has followed us here. I mean, it follows you around. Generally speaking, it almost has a half-life that seems to fizzle out over a period of months and days and years. And so it did follow me, because I brought that trailer up to Washington after I moved, and we would still get strange sounds in and around that trailer. We would still get strange gifts inside and outside of the house, things that moved around very much like a haunting, greasy handprints, strange, things left by the door. And but things have really settled down since the pandemic. Maybe once every 4 months we'll have something pretty small happen.
Yeah, we're gonna take a couple of questions, and I'm gonna let you get on your way. Oh, Bigger Dog asks, "How many hitchhikers have you gotten over the years?"
How many hitchhikers have I picked up over these years is probably the question. Well, I guess it depends who you ask. Some people say I have a couple of hitchhikers following me around constantly, but I don't see them. Excuse me, I'm still getting over this cold. I honestly, I don't know how to answer that question, Digger Dog, but I would say ultimately a few, and they, like I said, have tapered out over the last few months, but I've never really seen anything. I mean, I say that, and then of course I remember that I have seen stuff here on the property, but I've never seen what I would think is a Bigfoot here. I've seen something that looks like a black orb inside this trailer, which I've spoken about or speak about in the Al Moon Lab. It just a very crazy experience where I saw this black orb inside the trailer, moving in front of me from right to left, passing right in front of my face. And other witnesses here on the property have described seeing black balls of light, which is hard to call them light, but that's what's been described here. Also, interesting light anomalies, white lights in the woods as well. So there's stuff that's happened here even before I moved here as well. That's how I met my girlfriend, who's also a Bigfoot witness. So she's had stuff happen here at the cabin before I moved here as well. So I think, the land itself may have some interesting stuff that happened before I got here, but there was definitely a couple tips of the hat to the stuff that happened down in Oregon.
I have a question. I'm going to be greedy. I want to know. You said about the dead animals, and I was telling you about the coyote leg that was left.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about this rabbit at the creek today,
Mm-hmm.
doing a little background and investigating on my own, and I'd love to hear that story if you got time for it.
Oh, sure. Well, as I was saying, I was building a Bigfoot statue inside in this haunted garage. And one of the things that you do, when you build a life-size taxidermy piece like this, is you have the stand that it rests upon called the terraform. And I wanted to make, like a forest setting for Bigfoot to be standing on. So I was talking to Daryl about it. I was like, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have, a rabbit kind of going down a rabbit hole, like a taxidermied rabbit, to symbolize the rabbit hole that we're going down. And so we started to actively, like, go on eBay or whatever, looking for just a little cotton tail rabbit or something like that. And I get home from work in the middle of summer, and I hop out of my Jeep, and this is in the book. I get my camera out as soon as I see this. There's a dead rabbit sitting in front of my trailer, and it has no predation on it. It's just laid flat right in the gravel in front of my trailer, between my boat and the trailer. And furthermore, it has no bugs on it, and it's the middle of summer. It's like, I think it's like 12 or 11 o'clock, and it's July. It's probably 80, 90 degrees. And there's no of these meat bees, we call them, right? Like the hornets that eat meat. And there's no flies. There's nothing circling it. So it is fresh as far as I'm concerned. That's the first thing I thought. And so I called Daryl out, who'd been accustomed to me getting home from work and finding strange stuff and calling him out from the house to come inspect it. And you can see his face as I'm zooming in, and he's coming down, and I pan to this rabbit that, he says it. He goes, "This was not here earlier." And it appears, although we didn't do a full field test on this rabbit, a necropsy, I think they call it, but the only thing on that rabbit that looked like it killed it was a stone in its skull. And so as I flip this rabbit over in the video, you can see embedded, I believe on the right side, is a rock. Now, maybe that rabbit was dropped from the air and it hit the gravel, and a piece of gravel embedded in its rock. Maybe an eagle grabbed a rabbit and dropped it. Okay, I could buy that. Sure. Bigfoot wasn't listening to my needs of needing a taxidermied rabbit. It wasn't playing a trick on me. But Daryl, says, "You better call Erin, your girlfriend, and tell her about this." So I call my girlfriend and I tell her, what had just happened. And she doesn't think I'm crazy. She knows this stuff happens. And she, she goes, he's kind of worried. She's out of state at the time. And she goes, imagine if it was a snake. You hate snakes. You're pushing the limit here with this stuff here. What if they would have left you a snake? And so what do you think happened? 3 days later, in the exact same spot, after I get home from work, is, he was more like 14 inches long red racer or something like that, sitting in the exact same spot. No bugs, no predation. The head has been pinched off like something just ripped the head off and stuck it by it. It had just started to bloat a little bit. And that's when I knew that was a throwdown, right? Something had a twisted sense of humor, because there was all these other things that we haven't even got into that are linked to things that we had just spoken about, like the cell phone. There's probably like 10 other good examples that happened on this property of something saying, "I hear you. I know what you're trying to do." That's why we can't trick them. That's why we can't go out there. They know, either they're reading your mind or hearing what you're saying. They know your motives. They know exactly what you're going to do. And so your intentions have to be pure with this phenomena. That's why I always say that this is a lot like, looking in the mirror and facing your own dark self, because this is just a conversation of reflection. you can't outwit this phenomena. Maybe somebody will get lucky one day with another Patterson-Gimlin type video, but no one's going to bag this phenomena like the traditional sense of bagging something natural. You're not going to be, you know, it's intangible. It's in my eyes, this is this is a land spirit. This is something that is so much older than probably we are. And it's real uncomfortable for people to hear jargon like that. But this is what the natives, how we started this conversation. This is something that walks between two worlds. And I think that's what I'm most comfortable calling Bigfoot, as a land spirit. And I think it suits them. And I think that's exactly what they are. They are the land. They utilize the land as though they are the land. They probably utilize the trees because they conduct entrance and exits out of them, as crazy as that sounds. But I think they are a spirit as well. And so they are the perfect invention.
Makes sense. It really does.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. You got time for one more question, or you?
Yeah.
Take one more question, and we're gonna let him get on his way. We got Mark Floyd Green asked, "Have you noticed a vibration when activity of paranormal, or Bigfoot, etc.?"
Vibration. I don't want to say no off the bat with that one, Mark, but a typical vibration, no. But certainly there was a conversation that Chris and I were having yesterday about there being a measurable difference in EMF or radio frequency, in particular EMF. And of course, an EMF discharge, it can have an effect on a person. Certainly when ghost hunters go out and they go into the basement, there's more electricity and conduit going on, and so you can have an unsettling feeling when you're in an EMF rich environment. But you shouldn't have an EMF rich environment in the forest unless you have a bunch of gizmos out. With that said, there seems to be leaning evidence, and there's a lot of work to still be done on this, on there being an electromagnetic anomaly when you're in the vicinity of one of these power spots. Certainly, if you watch Hunt for Skinwalker Ranch, you'll see them leaning into the radio side of things. But they also have their tri-field meters out, and they're getting EMF differences as well. And those are being reported in Bigfoot areas. Now, this is unknown country, but it's exciting to think that we're starting to utilize things that traditional paranormal researchers are using in haunted houses and graveyards. For a long time, these worlds have needed to converge, and now you can see them happen and see that happening at conferences, where these worlds are converging at conferences, right? You see the Bigfoot conferences inviting people like Linda Moulton Howe, and people that are invested in the supernatural, paranormal. And I think it's helpful to the conversation, but it's also, I think it's gonna garner some really interesting notions. We started bringing out ghost boxes to see if we could do word generation stuff, and see if we can actually get communication with them, spelling out words on our little ITC equipment. We also have been leaving out Scrabble letters to see if we can phonetically spell out things and get questions and answers back from whatever is corresponding with us by utilizing the spare letters from Scrabble blocks. that's a long way from your question here about vibrations, but leaning into the territory of the supernatural kind of lends, this kind of talk.
Do you ever check for radiation while you're out there?
No,
Okay.
I mean, I should, because there is a little bit of radiation talk in the Al Moon lab, in particular with one of the neighbors that I talked about earlier, the stranger guy that lived up on the hill, showed up with an anomaly on his head, which looked like a radiation burn. And it just happened overnight. And it was there for the remainder of the time I was at the Al Moon lab. It may still be there. And he was having a lot of UFO stuff happen. So to your point, we should have been carrying around, something like a tantamount to a Geiger counter or something, probably.
Yeah, that's what we're going to start doing. Bring that with us too. More gadgets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's frequency. It's all the frequency, I believe. So,
Yeah.
well, again, I want to say thank you so much. I've been fascinated the whole time, and we'll have you back again if you're more than welcome anytime to come back. Like I
Cool,
said,
man.
next Thursday on KGRA. Uh, he'll be here with his partner in the documentary, and actually, my first KGRA will be on Thursday night with Jay from Finding Jay. He's gonna be my first guest, and another guy, hell of a guy. He was just on a couple weeks ago, but
Yeah. He's a
so
good dude.
I'm gonna put Toby backstage, and I'm gonna say a couple closing words, and then I'll see you in a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Toby Johnson. All right. Well, what a show! What a show! What a show! This stuff, it cannot be. You cannot. You got to pay attention to it. You got to pay attention to it. It just keeps on. It's not coincidence anymore. Things are happening thousands of miles apart, and the same things are going on. So, I just want to say thank you to everybody. It was a good show. It was a good show, and I appreciate everybody showing up. As far as the eye goes, January 4th, I think they're going to take the oil out, and then I'll be back out in the woods. I can't wait for that to happen. So, you know it, as Larry always says, get in the woods, people.